Welcome to Cigar City Radio, episode number 21. I'm your host, Randy Ojeda, and making the magic happen, Mr. Jason Solanas.
Randy, I always wondered what it was like to be a goat.
This episode has a lot to do with goats.
And balls.
And insertions.
Michelle, you got nothing to say on this one?
No.
If you love Cigar City Radio, and we really hope that you do, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We encourage you to leave a review in the iTunes store and share the show with your friends. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Cigar City Radio, and you can email us at cigarcityradio@gmail.com.
This episode of Cigar City Radio was recorded at the Blind Tiger in Ybor City. The Blind Tiger is a 1920s speakeasy-style coffee shop serving coffee, tea, vegan pastries, and more, with locations in Ybor City and Seminole Heights. You can check them out at blindtigercafe.com.
We are now only 2 weeks away from our first ever Noche Buena party taking place during South by Southwest with 15 bands.
All right, now, gentlemen, let's read those names.
We got Hockey Dad,
A Detective,
High-waisted,
Sand Medicine,
Jackson Boone and the Ocean Ghosts,
the undercover dream lover,
Dirty Dishes,
Wobbly Jets,
field trip,
Shark Muffin,
Fruit and Flowers,
tall Juan.
the Plastic Peaks themselves.
and Venny Hands.
And when's that happening, Jason?
That's happening on Wednesday, March 15th at Stay Gold in Austin, Texas. It's happening from 3 p.m. to 2 a.m. There's no cover, and if you're under 21, we will kick you out.
You'll get a swift kick in the buttocks.
Oh, and be there or be square.
Yes.
Our guest on this episode is singer, songwriter, and guitarist Glen Phillips, best known as the frontman from the platinum-selling band Toad the Wet Sprocket. He's worked with Sean Watkins and his sister, who is also Cigar City Radio veteran Sarah Watkins, on the Mutual Admiration Society collaboration, and has released numerous solo studio albums and live releases. Also, his song The Hole is featured at the end of the second episode of Breaking Bad's Season 1.
Yeah, a little fun fact for you. All right, check that out on Netflix.
Yeah, and you can also check out his new album, Swallowed by the New, out now on Umami Music.
So here it is, episode 21. So much more. Actually, we just had Sarah Watkins on the show a couple weeks ago. I know you did the Mutual Admiration Society,
NWPA
yeah
record, and yeah, she's one of my favorites. She's amazing.
Yeah, she was great to talk to, and
yeah,
really
her
cool.
new record's insanely good.
Yeah, you should tour again with her.
I would love that.
We'll set it up. No, not us personally, but there you go. Set it
Do
up.
your best.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. So I know the burning question for a lot of people that are familiar with Toad the Wet Sprocket, but maybe aren't, connoisseurs of the band, if you will. Mm-hmm. The question that everybody asks is, what's going on with the band name?
Oh, the eternal question.
The eternal question.
The band name was basically there was a Monty Python. They had this recurring character. They had a bunch of band names whenever they were doing fake terrible bands. Mm-hmm. One of the band names they would use was Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Okay.
So just supposed to be an absolutely horribly named horrible band, and we thought that was us. So it's strange that we get. I mean, it's one of those things. We one of the only lists we ever make Like, we never got a Grammy or anything, but we always make like the top 10 worst band names of all time. Which is absolutely fine, but it's like
it's something to be proud of.
A list we knew we were signing up for.
Yeah,
and there's the idea that somehow we thought it was a cool name, and we knew actually exactly how dumb it was.
And was that the thing? Was it just kind of just a joke that just went too far?
Yeah, it was going to be a placeholder, and we were going to come up with something really cool. Yeah. And then like a year passed, and we played all these shows, and it just became the name, and we still thought it was hilarious. And so, there you go.
I mean, the thing is, like, I think bands put too much stock into their names. I mean, the Beatles was a dumb name. Led Zeppelin was a dumb name, you know? But those are great bands. I think you can look past the name. And then once you have the name, it's hard to change it. Like, it's hard to, what would you have changed it to? I don't even know.
I have no idea. Toad would have been fine. Sprocket would have been fine.
Yeah.
Wet's probably not.
Well, there's a band called Wet now, I think.
Yeah, and there's Wet.
Yeah.
Moist doesn't.
Moist does not work.
Nobody likes Moist.
Oh, but it works.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Toads and Toad-like bands, I guess. So, but
anyway,
to have them all together is incredible.
I guess so.
This is a lot of content about Toads.
No, we got a lot better stuff. So you started Toad the Wet Sprocket like 1989 was the first record, right? Bread and Circuses?
Yeah, first one that came out. I mean, I started playing music with Todd, the guitarist in Toad, when I was a freshman in high school. He was a senior, and he had a car, so I could get a ride back from choir or theater from him. We were all theater geeks. And... yeah, like the summer after my freshman year in high school, we started playing music. So I was probably, 15 when we were starting to do it, 14, 15. And they were all seniors, so it was they graduated and we're all staying in town. And the plan was that they were all getting ready to go out of town and go to school elsewhere.
And this was
then we got a record deal.
This was California?
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara, yeah. California. And then, so you got a record deal pretty early on then.
Yeah, I was 18.
Wow.
And we had the first 2 records done and went on the road, and there you go.
That's amazing.
It's been a long detour.
Is that what it is? This whole thing is just one long detour?
Kind of. I mean, I knew, I'd been in theater before the band. I always felt like I needed creative outlets, but I wasn't. I think usually if your band gets signed, it's like the only thing you want out of life. Like you have to have this very singular passion for music specifically. Mm-hmm. And we got really lucky. We made a couple of indie records, and I think A&R people in LA wanted an excuse to go up to Santa Barbara. I mean, it was a really great, back in the day of the corporate card, like... rather than say, I need to go to Hawaii for a weekend, like they could do a little Santa Barbara vacation, get the record company to pay for their hotel room, see us play. And I think that's like half the reason we got signed.
Yeah, it was just because you were in the right spot.
A&R people wanting to just drive up to Santa Barbara. And so we kind of lucked out. I mean, hopefully the music was good too. We worked really hard, but I'd planned on a more academic life. I'd wanted to do like high school teacher kind of route.
Really?
And, Randy was poli-sci and Dean was, it's just none of us were expecting that would be the thing we'd end up doing professionally. And then we just suddenly found ourselves having it be the job. So we worked as hard as we could at it. But we all assumed it was going to crumble in a couple of years and then we go back to our regular life.
So you weren't like this band of like, proto-punk street urchins or anything, like you were like actually...
we were pretty middle class. I had punk rock pretensions, but, in a very...
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, although the Santa Barbara punk scene was a pretty cool one, it was very, it's a small enough town, and so... there's a place called the Noise Chamber. This band, guy from Texas, he lives there again. They had a band called This Ascension, and they were kind of, let's say the Cocked Out Twins of Santa Barbara, and they were, somewhat in the emo and goth world. Well, pre-emo, right? It was way before emo, but more like a 4AD band, and and the punk bands would play there, and we would play there, and it was the kind of thing where we'd do shows with punk bands, and there'd be a pit going, and then we would go on, and everybody would just sit down cross-legged and listen. And it's not like people got up and left.
Yeah.
It's like everybody would sit and listen and be mellow, and then the next band would go up, and the pit would start again.
Hey.
And it was a really embracing scene, and so you could kind of be what you were, and there wasn't a huge pressure to be edgier than the next band.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
cool, because a lot of times those kinds of hardcore and punk scenes can be a little put off by a mellower, chill band.
Yeah, and Santa Barbara seemed to do it well. And once again, it was just a small town. There was this great metal band called Creature Feature at the time. And, when Creature Feature was playing, it's like you could all play the same gig.
Yeah.
And everybody would just get along and dig the music. And, it was pretty broad. And we also lucked out because there was this club in town called The Shack. This guy, Jerry, ran it. And he thought that ASCAP and BMI were thieves. Somebody walked into his business one day and was like, "Hey, you're playing music there. You got to pay a monthly thing for the songwriters and publishers."
Yeah, it's a little mafia-esque, a little bit.
Except that as a songwriter, it's the only way I make a living from my songs.
Well, that's the
there
thing.
is that.
Yeah, yeah. But I could see how if you hear it on paper, or if you see it on paper, it sounds like I could see how somebody could think it was a criminal thing
without including the songwriter's work.
But the reason we learned to write so many songs was because the one of the only places that would let us play in town was the Shack, and at the Shack you weren't allowed to play any covers. You couldn't even sing Happy Birthday there if it was somebody's birthday.
Wow.
So there was absolute strict. He never had a radio on because he wouldn't pay for the radio. So he had local bands, which he wasn't paying anything.
Yeah.
Playing all original music, and so we would play there like every week when we were in high school, and we had to come up with a full set of original material. And it wasn't like, and the great thing was there are people who have places like that, and they're like huge proponents of local music, and he was just cheap.
Yeah.
He was merely cheap. But the result was that all these, primitive radio gods came out of there. A bunch of great bands played at the Shack all the time because that was the place where you had to play original music.
Yeah. So a lot of bands got opportunity through his cheapness.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's good. At least something good came out of it.
There was a benefit.
That's amazing. So at what point because it was Columbia Records, I think, was released Pale?
Yeah, they released Bread and Circus and Pale.
And then Pale. Yeah, because they re-released Bread and Circus.
They both were, Pale we'd recorded but hadn't released yet. So we had 2 albums done when we got signed with them.
Gotcha.
And one we'd released, we'd sold 500 copies in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a big release.
But that's a big release for a local band.
For a local band. It was pretty good.
Yeah.
They put that out, and then I think 91, 92 was the Fear record, and then like 9 months into that we had All I Want, and then lasted till around 97, and yeah.
So you went from in the span.
You haven't heard anything I've done.
Well, no. So you went from in 2 years, you went from a local band playing it was 2-3 years. You went from being a local band to being a platinum selling, major label act at the age of 20 something.
Yeah, like 21, 22.
That's I don't even know how I would deal with something like that.
It was weird. It's a complicated thing. I had great friends and was really grounded. I met, my wife and I split about 2 years ago, but we got together when I was 18, just before the band was getting signed. And so I feel like I had a really grounded life and a lot of great friends who weren't, I don't know. I never moved to LA. I stayed in Santa Barbara. I started having kids, got married at 23, started having kids at 25. And I was pretty much, just a domestic guy. I would go out and work and then come back. And so on the one hand, I probably cost myself an incredible amount of money and career capital by staying in Santa Barbara and never really interacting with the business. But on the other hand, my kids grew up really happy, and I didn't have the big flame out that a lot of people in my business do.
And now you're still doing this,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
many
I
years
also
later.
didn't do, I call it the Rob Thomas maneuver, which is it's like your band breaks up and you make a daring flip roll into a solo career where you have notoriety based on your own name and not just the band's name. Mm-hmm. And I fumbled. I did not stick that landing very well.
Why do you say that?
Well, it's things are much smaller now.
Well, yeah, I mean the whole music industry is.
The whole music industry is shrunk. But there's a thing of, your name versus the band's name and some equity between the two.
Yeah.
And I didn't do the greatest job of making that transition.
So do you feel
okay?
Do you feel like you're making up for that now? I know you
no,
just had
no. I think it's too late. But
do you care?
I'm just writing good songs. I mean, I go back and forth between caring. You know, it's a strange thing because the business is once again has changed a lot and is based so much on kind of seeming. I guess there's part of it that's based on the work you do and the quality of the songs you write and what you bring to the table. And then there's also, do you have a narrative that people want to hear at a given time? Do you have a look? Do you have a, is like the whole package put together in some way that's palatable? And, I think with any job, like you can be really good at the thing you do and some flip in trend or technology or just, like if you were the world's best travel agent, or let's say you ran the world's best video shop, right? You were the guy. Let's do video shop.
Video.
You were the one with like all the great weird movies who knew what people's taste was, and you could turn people on to some beautiful indie film that would blow their mind, and they always wanted to come into your shop and ask you what. And you just happened to invest in a thing that suddenly was going to die no matter how good you were at it, right?
Yeah. There was nothing that Blockbuster could have done to prevent Netflix.
Yeah. And so, these things happen. They're like, it's just how history works. And I mean, music, there are times where if you did dance music was what, it's like there's times where a certain kind of music is more popular. There was a friend who was telling me that actually the big, 50s Afro-Cuban, the reason that got so big was actually, once again, ASCAP and BMI. Mm-hmm. That there was a period, maybe it was as far back as the 40s, but musicians were starting to license songs. They were insisting that radio pay the songwriters and the publishers for the songs they were playing.
Mm-hmm. What a concept.
What a concept. And so radio stations started finding, if they played Latin music, the Latin artists were just happy to be able to tour in the States, and so the music was largely unlicensed. Oh. And so you could run a radio station without having to pay the songwriters if you were playing the Cuban music.
Wow. I didn't know that.
It was part of the... and it's awesome music, right?
Yeah, it's
great
true.
Bands, incredible music.
Yep.
It was also free for the radio stations. And so they were playing exclusively unlicensed music, and they made this great music really popular in the States. And, and part of it was because of time in history and because they were being cheap bastards.
Yeah, but that's what people were hearing on the radio, I guess. So that's what people gravitated
and
to.
There's weird stuff like that. I just listened to this podcast on... this guy who is this quack doctor. His big thing for a while was basically getting impotent men, and he would he had a herd of goats. They would go over. They would pick out. Originally, it was bring your own goat, and then he got big enough that he had his
BYOG.
BYOG. And then eventually there was the goat buffet, and you would pick a goat you identified with, and they would slice out its balls and insert them in your scrotum, and it was supposed to cure your impotence. Didn't work very well. I think
sound like it would.
43 people died at his clinic. Oh. And people were too embarrassed. It's like you went in for impotence and you got goat balls put in you, and if it didn't work out, you weren't going to go to the cops. But this guy, part of the reason he became so successful, and he had all these quack medicines, but it was the very beginning of radio, and he bought himself a transmitter. He ended up losing his medical he got, the AMA shut him down. He was, put away for fraud, and he ended up moving to Texas and setting up a mic in his house, and then having like 500,000 watts or something of power. He had a transmitter in Mexico, like with a wire going underground from Texas into Mexico, so he could broadcast all his quack medicine things. But the other thing about this guy was he was a big country music fan, and country music was not getting played on the radio in the States. And so he became like the first major country music station.
Wow.
So it's another one.
Yeah, like how does that happen?
So he made country music popular.
If I named a band Goat Ball Insertion and played country, would anyone get it?
Possibly.
That seems very obscure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't want to go anywhere near goat balls, I think is the moral of that story.
Yeah. Anyway, you never know what good will come from a strange thing.
Yeah.
I guess that's all I'm saying. Cool. Motives be damned.
But yeah, so music definitely goes through some weird phases and weird things, and now we're in a much less goat ball-y shift in the music industry, but still a shift nonetheless.
I mean, there's less of a middle class, and there's more of a middle class. It's interesting. The current age really rewards digital natives. I mean, I think if you're really confident about putting yourself out there in a visual way, if you're willing to make a lot of YouTube videos, I mean, there are methods of availability that are democratized now, which is a really positive thing. But just as the radio, like the record industry, it's always promoted primarily. It's like youth, fashion. There are certain things that it's better at selling, right? And YouTube also rewards a certain set of people who are comfortable making things that do well on YouTube.
Yeah.
And, And it's great because the barriers to entry are a lot lower. And it's to some degree anybody can get in now. But it also, there are certain bands, like I think of a band like Neutral Milk Hotel, who, do you know Neutral Milk Hotel?
Oh, of course.
I mean, and they became, they were kind of like the Zombies in that they made this record, nobody knew about it, and then they disappeared. And then after their demise, they became the most important indie band in the world. Right? And everybody copped their sound. And, when they came back, it was like the second coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they, in the YouTube era, like they did well in the trading era. They broke up at a time where they could become viral without visuals, right? Which is a lot harder to do now. Like indie bands, like now that everybody's on a streaming service, the indie stuff doesn't rise to the top in the same way. The selection processes are different. And if it's not on YouTube, if it doesn't have great visual accompaniment, I think YouTube is the one place where people are still finding and trading independent music in a way that doesn't necessarily happen on Spotify. Like Spotify, it's about playlists. Right. Apple Music is its own weird thing. Yeah. And so it's this moving target. The way people are sharing and discovering music keeps changing constantly. And Neutral Milk Hotel was also, I think, a remnant of a certain technological era, and that would not have been discovered in the same way right now. Just because they have a different tool set. Right?
That sort of lo-fi thing they were doing.
Lo-fi, and that it was music only. Yeah. There were no accompanying visuals. Nobody knew who they were, what the story was, where it came from. It was just somebody sat you down and was like,
That's how I heard.
Sit still for 8 minutes. I'm going to play "Oh Comely."
Yeah. That's how I got into Neutral Milk Hotel. I was in high school. My friend Ryan Backman sat me down and said, "You have to listen to this." And by like the third chord, I was in.
Oh yeah. I love you, Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Never heard anything like that's the thing. That album is like it's like your really depressed friend. I would describe it to people who hadn't heard it as like, well, let's say you had a friend who was like really thoughtful, really sensitive. You kind of knew they played music, but you were afraid that they'd suck. And so you never asked to hear, and they were too shy about it. And then they killed themselves, and you had to go through their stuff, and you found the cassette tape of the album they'd been working on, and tearfully you put it on, and it ended up being the best album you'd ever heard.
Yeah. That's an amazing.
Neutral Milk Hotel.
That's an amazingly apt description of Neutral Milk Hotel. Sad, but apt.
That's so depressing.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's amazing. Yeah, and you're right. I feel like an album like that probably wouldn't have broken out in the same way it did now. I mean, maybe on Bandcamp. You know, Bandcamp, I feel like it's kind of like the new tape scene a little
discovery.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and Bandcamp's its own culture, though. I mean, it's a weird... It's not what Napster was. Mm-hmm. It's not what the trading world was. Yeah. I mean, there were so many tape trees, like digital tape trees, and even pre-Napster, there were... Like when it was really about the peer-to-peer world.
Yeah. I was all about the IIRC stuff back in the day.
Yeah, and so the sharing of stuff, Bandcamp, it's more a single portal, and as much as it's indie and people, you know, they have a really cool service, but it's still, it's not the same. I don't think anything's going to match what the peer-to-peer world was.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Or at least nothing I could yet predict.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there working on something that's going to blow our minds in 3 to 5 years, you know? Or I hope so.
I mean, it keeps changing. Who would have thought, like Facebook, like considering where Facebook started, and, you know, I've got, like, my 15-year-old daughter, you know, she will not touch Facebook is where old people go to complain, right?
Yeah,
like
not wrong.
Who would have thought that Facebook would become that?
Yeah, it started as where college kids went to hook up and like meet each other.
Oh
you know? And now it was
ultra exclusive, and now it is old people like filtering what they see so that they only see what they agree with.
Yeah,
I mean it's.
It's true. Yeah,
she's on Instagram and she doesn't want. I mean, what's weird is that our generation, who snickers at their generation, you know, my generation, excuse me, I'm older than you, but like we are more slaves to our social media than our kids are. My kids understand, like, I got a 21-year-old, and eventually there was like an iPhone that a friend had, the camera was broken, and her flip phone died. And she went to AT&T, and like they didn't have just a regular phone. She had to get a smartphone.
Yeah.
And she was so upset about it because she didn't want to become another iPhone zombie. And you know, I see their generation as they've already seen these tools. They've already...
Yeah, they're not impressed by this.
They're not at all impressed by it, and they're less a slave to it. And all the lonely, you know, I'm in the ranks of the divorced, and I can tell when I'm getting depressed because I look at Facebook more. So I won't feel lonely.
Yeah.
And, you know,
but then you feel lonelier and lonelier. That's like, it's a cycle, you know?
It's terrible.
Wow. I can't believe that kids nowadays, they really are gravitating away from Facebook.
Yeah, they'll do. I mean, Instagram is like the level of, you know, it's like post a picture of something you think is cool. And you can kind of tell a lot about a person from their Instagram. It's like, is your camera facing out or is your camera facing in? If it's all facing in, not so interested. If it's facing out, like, hey, that says something about you. You look at the world outside and you want to share it. And it doesn't require a lot of commentary. And it's like, it's a medium that doesn't control your life. And if you want to go the narcissism route on it, you can. But then again, that's really easy to avoid on it.
What I love is that it's easier now to find like-minded people and connect with them. You know, if you seek out your niche community, you can really, you know, make a good.
And the problem with the like-minded part, I mean, and I say this as, you know, a liberal, probably. You know, I was a Bernie kind of guy. Seeking
no
out,
judgments here.
Seeking out, and seeking out like-minded people is also a difficult thing, particularly in these days. Like, you know, and having lost the idea that we're all ultimately on the same side, even if we have different ideas of how to get there. it's really easy to get in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And, there are as many echo chambers on the left as there are on the right, even though people who think like I do like to pretend that we aren't our own echo chamber.
I think there's also a problem with finding like authentically like-minded people, because so often like whether it's a big movement like Bernie's movement and stuff like that, people will kind of just go with what they think is popular. So then they might pick up, because the internet gives you so much information as well. So you can learn about something, so you can present yourself as a knowledgeable person or someone that has the same likes or interests as you, but it's never really as authentic as it might be if you sit down and actually like meet somebody and talk to them and learn the differences and stuff as well. So,
well, and you can bond on, fake news articles that you haven't read in their entirety that you share because they make you feel good about yourself. I mean, I've been trying to limit my news sources more. I got bad about it in the last few months. I went on like a total media fast after Trump got elected. I just couldn't handle it. And I was so mad at social media for like the echo chamber and all the disinformation.
Yeah.
And it made me so infuriated. And I've been like letting news back in, since right after the inauguration. I like started going, okay, I need to get active. I need to get involved again. I took my break and trying to edit my news sources even meaning, there's things like Raw Story or Crooks and Liars there, the liberal, anything that is. Like I stick with NPR. I try to stick with news sources that existed before the internet and have greater journalistic integrity, because I know that, use the Huffington Post as an example. Like, internet-only journalism is click-based, and their entire profit motive is based on maximum amount of clicks, because every time you click, you reload ads. Every time you reload ads, they make money. And, just knowing that every headline is made to titillate or inflame. It's made to get some part of your amygdala going, so you click on it, so you reload the ads. And it's like every single one of those websites, left or right, they are all catering to our worst nature. Yeah. And they are all catering towards feeding us what we want to hear, every single one of them. And it's just like remembering the profit motive. And remembering if I'm seeing news and it's all making me feel like I'm right, then I'm probably not actually seeing news.
Yeah. And then you take into account Facebook's algorithms that show you what is right only for you. The most entertaining thing for you and the thing that's going to increase their profit margin. Because Obama having goat ball insertion is much more entertaining than Obama signing a bill that actually helps people.
Yeah. It did cure his impotence, though.
He was the one case. Where...
He was the one. I mean,
you heard it here first.
Yeah, are we saying this on the record? So how do you deal with that through music and through? Does that reflect in your writing and in the songs you're writing now?
I haven't written. It's really hard to write well and directly with political stuff, and I can go back and forth on it. I mean, I think there are people who. How can I say this? I think having the right message is not always enough in art. It also has to work as art.
Yeah, it's got to be good, or else no one cares.
For me, it's good to have both. But my personal standards are also I'm curious how it plays out. I mean, and there's songs, on my current album. There's a song called "The Easy Ones" that it was written about Tonglen practice. It's this Buddhist meditation where you kind of expand your capacity for compassion by meditating on love, but you start with people who make you feel comfortable about yourself, and then you try to expand the sphere, and you go into people who drive you crazy and people you don't understand at all, and then you try to practice loving them. Like, can you actually concentrate on the people who drive you crazy and who you don't understand and love them, and so there's songs like that that song, when it was written, was very personal. At this point, feels very political, and I feel there's an art in trying to figure out how to say what I think is true or important in front of an audience, and because people are so polarized, not drive the audience away. And so to be self-effacing, to kind of own my, I have my own prejudices, I have my own point of view, but I also feel like everybody is ultimately motivated. Not everybody, but most people, left or right, are motivated by love for their family, love for their friends, love for the people around them. I think there's varying degrees of, Dan Savage calls it like the imagination of your compassion. Can you imagine your way into understanding that people unlike you are also lovable, and how different can you get before you do that? And it's that thing of, when people are like, can support a wildly anti-gay, agenda and somehow think that marriage equality takes something away from them, and think that marriage equality has any effect at all on their church or their, which it doesn't.
Right.
And it's like, how does giving other people the same rights you have take anything away from you, right? Is your privilege in some way harmed by someone else just having basic human rights?
Is that the theme of the current record, Swallowed by the New?
The new record is, it's mostly about loss and transition. It's about grief and praise. Grief and Praise is kind of the central song on it. It was written, I'd been married 23 years, with my ex for 25, since I was 18. And we split, and I was finding my way through that. And there's not a lot of great tools in our culture for kind of meeting transition well.
In every sense of the word.
Yeah, and I found myself, there's a whole community of men who would like to get together when you're in that situation and get really bitter with you.
Right.
And I found myself working very hard to avoid that, and to, I don't know, try to do a lot of self-examination and get a restart. I mean, at some point, if you lose everything you thought you were sure of, you get a chance to, reassess and start again. And it's an interesting process to be at this point in life, and, had all these ideas about what the future might bring, and I have no idea at this point.
Yeah.
And learning to care for myself, learning, spiritual life. I actually just had another breakup, was with an amazing woman for a year and a half, and I'm needing to be back closer to my daughter. I've been seeing her every month, but not seeing enough of her, and
well, I think that's the amazing thing about being a musician and a songwriter too, is like you really go through a lot of self-reflection, thinking on things like that, whereas most people might just, go through the breakup and then that's it. Yeah, do anything to avoid it.
Yeah, and the doing anything to avoid it, like, once again, we're very isolated, and the tools we have, these days, our generations, like, we don't have intact social structures. Trying to find my toolbox has been really interesting, and realizing that we're a lot of us making it up as we go.
Well, we're pretty much out of time here, so
okay.
Just real quick before we go, you mentioned your daughters and your family a lot. I just want to know if there's one thing that you want your daughters to take away from your music, what would that be?
I'm cynical about that. Back to ASCAP and BMI. I just wish it earned a little more so I could leave it to them as their inheritance, and it would be worth something.
There you
Isn't
go.
that a terrible thing?
No, that's a totally noble thing, man. It's a totally noble thing.
died. Imagine your way into understanding that people unlike you are also lovable.